Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Remote No Pressure Podcast. We're so happy that you're here with us, listening, checking out what's going on. This has been an epic week. I hate the word epic, okay? I probably shouldn't say that. This has been a great week. It's been a fantastic week here at Remote No Pressure for two reasons. Number one, we have a great guest. We have the president of Scientific Anglers on our podcast today, Mr. Brad Befus, who tells us about how he got into fly fishing. He's going to share with us a few tips about fishing for carp on the fly. He's also going to talk to us a little bit about what's going on at Scientific Anglers and their roots. It's great. We're so thankful for Brad's time. Thank you so much, Brad, if you're listening. Number two, I've been telling you guys over the last few episodes that we have some very big news coming up. Well, if you're on my mailing list, you got, I believe it was Thursday we sent it out. We sent out an announcement. If you didn't get the email, check your junk mail. I mean, let's be honest. Those things always go to junk mail. If you have any tips on how to keep that out of junk mail, would you please email me at jefft@remotenopressure.com, because it always ends up in junk mail. And I know there's probably someone out there listening that knows how to keep from that. But anyways, so the big announcement, I know it's not quite fall yet, but I told you it was some big news coming this fall. We have a soundtrack out now called Songs About Fly Fishing, and it's awesome. It's great. We were able to put that out. We dropped it this week. Go to remotenopressure.com. We're actually giving them away for free. All we ask is you pay for shipping, but we want to get it in your hands. You can also download it there too. So go to remotenopressure.com and check that out. We're so excited. Thank you so much. Thank you all for listening. Welcome to the podcast. Let's light the fire. Today on the Remote No Pressure Podcast, we have Brad Befus with us from the Scientific Angler. Thank you for joining us today, Brad.
Absolutely.
Now, Brad, you sent over a bio and a few pics, and on your bio, it had mentioned that you have been doing this for over 35 years. So that's a long time. What got you into fly fishing?
You know, I actually started tying flies before truly fly fishing. I had received a Christmas gift with a fly tying kit from my parents when I was about 7 or 8, and really got into just playing with all the fur and feathers and kind of creating my own stuff. There was a small booklet in there that had a couple of patterns, but really the fly tying is what got me started and got me most interested. My dad fly fished a little bit, and I'm the youngest of 4, had 2 older brothers and an older sister. And my brothers fished a little bit, never really got into fly fishing, and I just kind of got smitten with the fly tying side of it. And then in high school, had an opportunity. My freshman year in high school, had an opportunity to take an outdoor education class, and I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. And the high school, through this outdoor ed class, it was kind of camping and fly tying. So the fall semester was the camping portion of it, and then when the weather got cold, we did fly tying. So we tied woolly worms, Adams, kind of a parachute ant style fly, and that just kind of got my interest going that much deeper. And we had a couple of fly shops in Boulder, very close to where I lived. One of them was Front Range Anglers, which I later worked at, taught classes, managed, and then later on owned that with a business partner before selling that in the late 90s and kind of continuing on into other roles within the fly fishing industry.
Yeah, you've had quite the run. Now, are you originally from Michigan, or are you from Boulder?
I was born and raised in Boulder, so that's where I grew up and kind of cut my teeth, so to speak, on fly fishing. Lived in the Table Mesa area of Boulder and had a city park lake that was close by that had panfish and bass, and had some really big carp when I was late in junior high and high school. And just kind of getting into it, used to keep a rod in my locker at school, and we had open campus scheduling at my high school. So I would get a couple hour break mid-morning in my spring semester, the way I would set my schedule up, so I could go down there and fish for a couple hours almost every day during the school year, weather permitting.
That sounds like a great high school time period there. And as far as you said you got started tying flies, do you remember the first time you caught a fly or you caught a fish on a fly that you tied, Brad?
I do. I actually, it was kind of an unnamed pattern, just something I had created. I know it had chenille, and I had wrapped like mallard flank, kind of like a soft tackle on the front of it, and ended up using that on a spinning rod with a bubble at that lake that I was talking about, and caught a bluegill. Was the first fish that I caught on one of my own flies, and I was probably about 8 years old when that happened. Used to fish there with my buddies that grew up in the neighborhood, and that was kind of the thing that really sealed the deal for me with fly tying. It was like, this is so cool because you could create something and use these different materials and put it on a hook and actually go fool a fish with it.
Yeah, for sure. Now, have you ever done any kind of spin casting or traditional type tackle, or have you always just done fly fishing, Brad?
No, I do still today, enjoy using conventional gear, throwing the spinning rod occasionally, and throw a bait caster occasionally. Really, I grew up using spinning and casting rods, and we would do family trips, various rivers and lakes in Colorado, and fish conventional hardware or bait and catch fish, and it was just kind of part of growing up. And I really kind of view fly fishing as just another tool or quiver. I certainly enjoy the casting aspect of it and being able to tie the flies and have that kind of reward of catching something or fooling a fish on something that you've created. Mm-hmm. And I like a little bit of the technical aspect of fly fishing. It's just for me it's just a more enjoyable way to fish most of the time, but I'm certainly not opposed, if conditions aren't right, or, you're doing a saltwater destination trip and you've got wind and weather to contend with. I'm absolutely will pick up some conventional gear if it's the difference between not fishing or not being able to catch fish in a certain situation.
Sure. Now you've hosted trips before. Have you ever really guided, or have you always owned a shop, or have you ever been a fishing guide?
Owned shop, and then we did not have a guide service until maybe the last couple of years that I was an owner there. So what my involvement was on the destination side was hosting those trips. So did a number of saltwater destinations in the late 80s and throughout the 90s. Belize and Mexico. Did a pretty good amount of fishing down in the Keys. Got into tarpon fishing very early on. Actually, when I was in high school, started going down there with some customers at the shop, and they kind of took me under their wing, and that was a pretty bad bug to catch. It was, I spent a lot of time tying flies and mowing yards and working as much as I could in the shop to be able to earn enough money to get a plane ticket and help share in the expense of a guide to be able to go and do that. And then we did destination trips to Alaska. Barry Reynolds, a good friend of mine that was really into warm water fly fishing as well. We co-authored the Carp on a Fly book, and Barry also had a earlier book that he did, Pike on the Fly. And so we kind of, once we made the connection to the pike fishing and kind of learned we both like to chase carp on a fly, we started doing a fair number of hosted trips up into Saskatchewan and Manitoba, later into parts of the lower Yukon drainage in Alaska for northern pike. And, it was great because the shop was a good catalyst to allow me to have a customer base to book into those trips, and it afforded me the opportunity to travel to some pretty cool destinations, pretty early on in my fly fishing career.
That's great. I don't know of a lot of people who go up to Alaska to chase pike, but I'm sure it's a great time.
There's some pretty spectacular pike fishing that really just, for the most part, kind of gets overlooked or is kind of just considered bycatch up there, because you've got, obviously the appeal is the trout and the Pacific salmon, the steelhead fisheries that are there. My next oldest brother actually owns the operation that we started going to, and it's on the Anoka River drainage, which is part of the Yukon Delta. called Midnight Sun Trophy Pike Adventures, and it's a houseboat operation. So it's a floating lodge that you fly into, only accommodates 6 guests, and then we go out in smaller boats and fish the river tributaries and floodings and sloughs, small lakes off of that main river channel on the Anoka, and it just grows absolutely huge pike. The first year we were there, we had a group of 6, and we had 7 fish over 50 inches in that 1 week.
Holy cow, that's a big fish.
It is. So it was, definitely, we had some pike in Colorado, but they definitely didn't grow to that size.
Yeah, you live in Midland, Michigan, and my father-in-law pulled a 40-incher off the ice last year off the Grand River over in Grand Rapids area. And there's some big pike, but I know how big a 40-incher is. I can't imagine catching a 50-inch pike on the fly. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I've always kind of been drawn to, certainly the warm water. I think that the ease of access, and certainly as somebody that has been fortunate enough to make my career in the industry, certainly, recruitment of new anglers, making it easy for them to get on the water and be able to catch fish and have a good experience. Warm water is so great for that because they are accessible, and whether you start with panfish or you start chasing some of the more obscure, fly rod fish in terms of pike and muskie and carp. And, we've really enjoyed, since we've moved here to Michigan 4 years ago, the white bass fishery on the Detroit River, just above Lake Erie and below Lake St. Clair, is a great time, particularly with the kids. My 2 youngest daughters have really enjoyed that fishery because they're willing to eat. It's very visual. They pull hard, and so it's not and I think that's one of the cool things about the sport, really in the last 10 or 15 years is just the explosion of tactics and people going after the non-traditional, what you would think of non-traditional fly rod fish.
For sure. Like, for instance, like you had mentioned earlier, carp. Do you ever go up to Traverse City or the flats up there to go for carp? And
absolutely, that was when I knew that my job with Scientific Anglers was going to be moving from Minnesota to Michigan. That was one of the things pretty high on my priority list was the Lake Michigan carp fishery. And I heard about it, read about it, seen pictures, had friends that had come out and done it. And was excited to be able to fish those clear flats where it's sight fishing and, very similar to what you would be doing on a saltwater flat for bonefish or redfish, where you're stalking fish and it's all visual. And they're not easy. It's still, you got to have really good casting accuracy, and you're dealing with some wind and fish that are pretty spooky. So it's a challenging fish in a really cool environment.
Well, that's great. Now, Brad, you also hold a few world records. Am I right?
Correct. Yeah, I think I still have 3 of them in for fly rod line class categories for northern pike. And at one point had a 4-pound tippet world record on carp that was in the book for a couple of years and quickly got surpassed. But it was kind of at a time before anybody else was chasing them with fly tackle. So some of those were kind of open categories. It was pretty easy to get a fish in the book if you could just get one to eat the fly.
But I mean, you co-authored a book, Carp on the Fly. Am I correct?
That is correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about that book, and if people wanted to take a look at that, where they would find that, Brad?
Unfortunately, it's out of print, so I still see used copies available online. Mm-hmm. The was a small publisher that I mentioned earlier, Barry Reynolds and myself worked with, that was based in Boulder. And, we kind of jokingly one day when we were out chasing carp, we're like, we had a few people asking about it, kind of what you would do, what kind of flies should I throw, where do you find them, how do you figure out which ones are the best ones to cast to that are going to be more prone to eating the fly. And, we were still, it was kind of bycatch. We'd see them when we were out bass fishing, and we'd throw different flies and just kind of see what would happen. And slowly started kind of developing some patterns and, noticing some patterns in the fish as well that made them more consistent to catch. Mm-hmm. And we just kind of tossed out the idea, why don't we do a book? Nobody's written a book specifically about fly fishing for them. Huge game fish, in some of the European countries, and tremendous amount of books and articles have been written, fishing with more traditional, conventional bait tactics for them. So we kind of started framing it out, talked to the publisher, and they were interested. Really at that time there was Lefty Cray. You might find an article with Lefty talking about him in one of the magazines. Dave Whitlock had mentioned him in a couple of his books and articles. So there was, what we found out is after we got the book put out there, just kind of very general tactics and kind of explain some of the behaviors of the fish, we started getting some speaking engagements with different fishing clubs and at some of the sportsman shows. And it was amazing the number of people that kind of came out of the woodwork that were like, I've been fishing for these things too, but I just never really wanted to admit it. Or, I thought my buddies would laugh at me because I was trying to target carp. But the reality of it, it's kind of the common theme was they grow big, they're technical, they're not easy to catch. You've got to really work on your casting accuracy and your presentation. They're super spooky. They've got a really sensitive lateral line and part of their inner ear that they've got a really good connection with that lateral line, so they can pick up vibration and displacement in the water. So they're not easy to approach a lot of times, particularly in real clear water. So, it's just, and it's been awesome to see that fish specifically in the fly fishing world just grow in popularity. And it's, now if you flip through Facebook or you go on Instagram and you start looking at the photos that are out there, it's a mainstream species now that, anglers of all ages, fly anglers, are out there chasing. And it's, maybe not at the same level that, that you still see trout and salmon and steelhead, the kind of the more traditional species, but the popularity that's gained because they're close to home, they're readily available, just about in every state, as well as many of the foreign countries. It's just, they're a great game fish.
Mm-hmm. Well, we had Jim Gephardt on the podcast here. He's from Houston, and he owns ontheflymag.com. And he talked in great deal about how what they do in Texas is, they'll fish for these carps right out of the ditch with like this ugly, crazy Charlie fly that they're throwing at it. What are you throwing at these things, and why do you think it works?
It's like, if there's crayfish present, crayfish is always, or some variation, something that looks like an impressionistic crayfish is something I'll go to, 95% of the time. And the one fly that I still go back to in most situations, Bob Clauser had a smallmouth fly called a swimming nymph, and it basically represented a hexagenia nymph that he would use for smallmouth on the Susquehanna River. And that was just one of those kind of by chance, had some in a fly box one day, threw it at some carp, and they really ate it well. And we were able to repeat that over and over. So I kind of do a variation of that. Umpqua Feather Merchants actually sells the pattern that's, kind of my take on that pattern, which is a little bit more crayfishy looking than a hex nymph. Mm-hmm. Just with the materials that I've incorporated. And that fly, either an olive or rust, or some tone of beige, are kind of my three go-to colors. Occasionally I'll go to all black, mm-hmm. but kind of day in and day out, I'll start with that, and it really depends. You just need to do a little bit of research on the environment that the carp are in that you're specifically pursuing, because they're very opportunistic feeders. They will, I've seen them sip trichos in a stream. There was a small creek that I used to duck hunt on, and one day I literally had a tricho spinner fall coming down in the decoys, and there were like 6 to 8 pound carp in there just sucking down mats of tricho spinners coming down. I've seen them chase bait fish, several of the small bass ponds or farm ponds that had fathead minnows as forage. At certain times of year, I've seen them push those into the shallows and school them up just like any other game fish would do, and eat those bait fish. Damselfly nymphs, dragonfly nymphs. So just, a little bit, no different than you would do if you were, going to fish a a trout river here in Michigan, you'd kind of figure out what the hatches were that were going on and what the insect life and the invertebrate life would be in there. And you just get, it's kind of match the hatch fishing, so to speak, just doing it for carp with subsurface patterns. And they will eat on top. They'll eat terrestrials, beetles, and hoppers, terrestrial plant forms, things like cottonwood seeds, mulberries. Even here in Midland along the Tinnabalasi, there's several places that there's mulberry trees, and later in the summer, as those are dropping in, there will be small groups of carp in there picking off those mulberries. So we throw kind of a chenille, kind of a purple or black chenille pattern. It kind of plops down like a mulberry, and they'll swim up to it and eat it.
That's funny that you mentioned that, because I purchased a mulberry fly this year from Orvis, and it literally looks like a mulberry that I want to put in my mouth and eat. And I tried chasing a few carp. This is my first summer really going for those, because mainly in the summertime I'm going for smallies. But this is the first time, and I was unsuccessful, and so I thought it might be the fly, but it sounds like in the right situation that crazy looking mulberry fly might work. So it's good to hear.
Absolutely, yeah. If you find a place that's got some mulberry trees, and there's carp around, chances are they'll be eating them at some point throughout the summer.
Now, you had mentioned a lot of people ask you, how do you know which ones to go after, which ones are biting, which ones are going to take the fly. Can you give us a little advice on that, Brad?
Sure. Certainly there's some seasonality with it. You get that in the book we talk about there being sunbathers, if we kind of look at it through the cycles of the seasons. And generally that early season, particularly if you have dark bottom, a muddy substrate or something, and there's carp present, they'll get up in that shallower water with those dark bottoms just because it warms a little quicker. And just like any other large warm water species, pike would be a good example, even bass to a certain extent. The smaller fish get active typically earlier just because they're able to warm their bodies faster than the larger ones, and their metabolism speeds up, so they just, they've got to start eating. But, I think probably everybody that's spent any time around water that has carp, the telltale sign that they're there is during the spawn, when it's just, it's crazy. They're chasing one another, they're splashing, they're free jumping, which is just part of they don't have a redd or a nest like most other warm water species in still water, but they're a distribution spawner. And you'll get males that will try and school up groups of females during the spawn, and that's where you see all of that chasing and splashing activity. Typically, that's not a great time because they're focused on the spawn and not necessarily so much eating, but it presents a really good opportunity to cast to a lot of different fish. And if you're persistent with that, again, just kind of throwing general searching flies, just very nondescript type flies, you'll pick some fish up during that time. There's usually kind of a pre-spawn feed in most fisheries where they'll be active, and again, if there's fish in shallower water and they're tailing, those are obviously eating, or they're mudding, where you can visibly see some clouds of mud coming up off the bottom. You've got some fish that are feeding and filtering through the substrate. The fish that are schooled up, they're also very social. So when you do find schools of them, those fish that are swimming faster and a little bit deeper probably aren't the best candidates. I typically like to, if they're in schools, I like schools that are moving slower. They're maybe up near the surface, particularly if it's later in the summer. Those can sometimes be good candidates to throw a terrestrial type fly. Or a lot of times I'll throw soft tackles or kind of neutral buoyant type flies when they're up near the surface and moving slow, so I can keep the fly kind of suspended at their depth. It just allows me to keep it in their sight window longer. Mm-hmm. But really those fish that are, in still water, if they're tailing, they're actively feeding, and that could be in water that's so shallow their backs are sticking out of the water. Or you go, like here in Michigan, you go up to Beaver Island and you fish them on those kind of limestone flats and sand bottom bays, and those, some of those fish are in 4, 5, 6 feet of water, but it's, again, because the clear water aspect, you can see them, you can sight fish, and they're eating gobies, they're eating crayfish. Again, pretty opportunistic. So if you have something that's kind of in the general shape and color, typically those fish that are in that shallower water and exhibiting the kind of that downward look or tailing, if they're shallow enough to actually get their dorsal or their tail out of the water, those are some of the best candidates. River fish, no differently, than a trout, they will hold in a lane a lot of times when they're feeding. If there is a pretty prolific hatch and they're on insects, I've seen them hold in a current seam just like a trout would do and sit there and eat nymphs. There's a couple of the rivers and places I fish them in Montana, on parts of the Missouri, where there's good crayfish populations. Generally, you're not going to find them in the faster water, but if you find those transition areas where you've got fast water meeting slow water, or a seam there where you can slow it down in a back eddy, or maybe on the edge of a deeper run, the fish isn't going to be out in the heavy current, but they'll be off that current line in a little bit slower, softer water, where they can forage and pick off those crayfish that are down in the rocks.
Wow.
So a lot of times we're just kind of dead drifting crayfish into them if you can sight fish them and then just impart a little bit of movement on the fly, and that's kind of the trigger point to get them to pick it up and eat it a little more aggressively.
Wow. Do you guys hit up Beaver Island a lot in the summertime, Brad? Are you pretty familiar with that area, or?
I've not super familiar. I've been up there a couple of times. I've fished up there with a couple of my sales reps from Scientific Anglers. So when they've been in town for our sales meeting in June, we've gone up there and fished 2 or 3 days. Love that area, and it is truly like no other carp fishery I've ever experienced. Big water, some very large fish. It's all very visual and sight fishing. So it's definitely a pretty special fishery.
That's great. Yeah, it's kind of a hidden gem in Michigan. We've got a lot of great fisheries that a lot of people don't know about.
Oh, without a doubt. I'm amazed. Literally every year. I've only been here 4 years, and prior to that, I had never fished in Michigan. But just the diversity of the fisheries, and there's certainly the big name rivers that everybody goes to, and you fish the hex hatch and you go mousing and you get the salmon and the steelhead runs. But there's so many of those kind of hidden, tucked away gems. The smallmouth fishery that's here is just incredible, and that's still probably, given the choice day in and day out, if I could just fish for one fish, it would probably be smallmouth.
Yeah, we've got some great smallmouth here in Michigan. We really do. Now, another question for you. You on another note, we really talk here. We talk shop occasionally, Brad, but we really talk more about the philosophy of fly fishing and why we fly fish. Why do you think that you were, as a kid, you had mentioned you got into fly tying? It really, brought you in to fly fishing. Could you tell us why you think you were so attracted and just kind of sucked in to the art of fly fishing?
Yeah, I think that, probably the 2 biggest things for me, I mentioned earlier that creative side of fly tying and being able to make your own fly, your own lure, versus, younger years growing up, it was a daredevil or a rooster tail or a mep spinner or, something that you bought in the store and came out of a package. And the idea of actually building something on a hook that you could take out and fool a fish and catch a fish, even over and above the artistic side of the fly tying. That was one of the things that, even today still sticks out in my mind. I love tying flies. I love sitting down. It's just, it's one of my decompression things. If I can't fish or in the winter months, just to be able to sit down and create at the vise is one of the things that I love about this sport. And I think the other piece of it is, the casting aspect. I think there's something mesmerizing about watching someone fly cast and just that interaction between the fly line and the rod. It's so much more intimate when you do hook a fish and you've got the fly line in your hands, and that's that direct connection right to the fish. And you sort of have that with conventional fishing, but I think there's kind of another level of that when you are fly fishing. It's a much more hands-on aspect of fishing. And I think that, the other thing that kind of goes along with it, and I would say probably now that I have 4 children that love to fly fish and be in the outdoors and participate in the sport, is just the aspect of learning every time you go. I think that's fishing in general, but certainly with fly fishing, every time you go, if you have an open mind, you're going to learn new things. You're never going to know it all. And the people associated within the sport, it's a really great group of people. There's a certain level of camaraderie when you're on the water, and I think there is in all fishing and hunting and outdoor related activities. But fly fishing is a small enough industry and marketplace that I think it's pretty easy to get to know a lot of people in different facets of it, and it's that relationship side of kind of having that extended fly fishing family out there is something that I've always enjoyed as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. People are so gracious and so nice in the community. It's great to be part of the fly fishing community. And right now you are the president of Scientific Angler. And let me just ask you, where do you see your company going, and what kind of new innovative ideas do you see coming out of your company that you're saying, hey, our sales reps are seeing a lot of success in this. We're very proud of this. What would you say is really driving you guys at the moment?
Certainly, I mean, there's several parts to that. I think that, Scientific Anglers has always been kind of at the forefront of technology within fly lines. And I kind of alluded a little bit to this, in one of the earlier questions, but I think that the way we kind of look at fly lines specifically as being that one piece of equipment, and it's often overlooked, but that piece of equipment that aids in the rod doing its job. I mean, if you mismatch the wrong weight or the wrong taper line with, rods have gotten, the improvements in rods have gotten to be so much better over the last 2 or 3 decades. And the advancements in fly lines, both slickness, shootability, durability, and all of the different taper profiles. When I first started at retail and selling lines, there was 3 questions that you asked. And the first one, do you want a floating line or a sinking line? If it was a floating line, then the question was, well, do you want a double taper or a way forward? And that was really about the choices that you had. And that wasn't that long ago. Now, if I look at our floating line offering, we've got a lot of very specialized tapers for specific applications. So from our perspective, I mean, we've done a lot of SKU rationalization over the last 4 to 5 years to try and simplify that and create a much easier message to the anglers that are out there buying our products to help them make the right decision in their lines. But technology is still kind of in the background of what's driving us. So durability, slickness, floatability, sinking lines that cast and perform better, saltwater lines that cast and perform better. Those are some of the things that we're looking to try and do with our products. And really at the end of the day, and then the question we ask ourselves all the time internally, and our entire team thinks this way, is how do we solve problems for anglers? How do we make their experience on the water more enjoyable, more successful? Because ultimately, it's recreation at the end of the day, and you can take it as serious as you want to, individually, but it's at the end of the day, it's fishing. And it's a recreational outdoor activity. So we really go into our philosophy of our products, and it's, even though we do get very technical in some of our coatings and some of the advancements that we've brought in fly lines over the 70 plus years that the brand has been around, still at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to, is how do we solve problems that fly anglers are having on the water.
Well, that's a great question, Brad. And I've got one more question for you, and this may just be coincidence, but Midland is also home to Dow Chemical. Is a lot of your technology, was it founded there at Dow at the same time, or is there any relationship, or is it just a coincidence that you're in the same small, kind of small town there in Michigan?
It's not coincidence. Actually, our founders were chemists from Dow. Leon Martouche was the most noted that got the company started, and was kind of credited as the founder of Scientific Anglers. And they certainly brought some technologies that they had back in the 40s to build the first modern fly lines of a PVC coated braided core, and then adding different technologies, whether it's micro bubbles, little glass micro balloons for flotation, or silicone or Teflon type additives into the coatings to help enable slickness and flotation. Certainly, some of that comes from we've got a relationship there, as well as outside of that community as well. But the original technology and kind of the brain trust of Scientific Anglers came directly out of Dow.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. I was just a shot in the dark. My dad worked for Dow down in Texas.
Okay.
And so I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. I came up in Michigan in 2002. But well, thank you very much for being with us, Brad. If someone wanted to get a hold of you or get in touch with Scientific Angler or had questions about your company, what's the best way for them to reach out to you guys?
Email is probably the easiest way to get in touch with us about our products or with me directly. And we do have a contact tab on our website, which is at scientificanglers.com, or our email address there would be customer support at scientificanglers.com. And that goes directly through to our customer service and support department, but they can easily get a message directly to me if someone has a specific question for me.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Brad, and I'll probably see you on the water. Thanks a lot for spending some time with us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on to chat.
Well, thank you, Brad, and thank you for joining us this week on the Remote No Pressure Podcast. Don't forget to check out our website at remotenopressure.com. Sign up for our mailing list, be in the know, be the first to know everything what's going on. And until next time, go fishing.
It's time to dance and be free. Live the life you've always wanted, like the wind inside the trees. It's time to dance and be free. Hear the mountains in the distance say, come and run with